mate. How you doing?
Hey, Cliff, how are you, man?
Good.
Good to see you. Everything all clear on your end there?
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit of feedback through my headphones, but I'll try and figure that out. It's at this end. It's like your
Okay,
end of it's happening.
awesome.
It's a bit annoying. Hold on. How you doing?
Good, good, good. I'm good, man. Just keeping busy. Obviously here in Melbourne, just PTing still. Yeah, that's pretty much it. How about you and what's been happening since I last saw you, man?
Ah, I would say more of the same. I'm just basically cracking through this research and trying to get a few things done.
Yeah. What's the
Yeah.
research on? Because we know just to bring some introduction, you- you've done a master's in was it MCT, right?
Yeah, so I did my master's research in medium chain triglycerides and
Mm-hmm.
ketogenesis. So that was basically looking at how MCTs encourage improved ketosis number one, time to ketosis number two, and help improve symptoms and mood in a ketogenic diet. So that was sort of where things started in the master's research. And then I translated that across into my doctoral studies, which I'm just finishing off now. And that's really revolves around again ketogenesis, but more so looking at the difference in low carb diets and who different types of low carb diets might be applicable to.
Awesome. That's so cool. So let's get into it. But before we start, actually, maybe talk about your origin story. Like, introduce yourself. Like, how did it all start with you, and your background to where you are now in terms of your knowledge and everything else.
Yeah, well, it was slightly accidental that I got into nutrition originally. I was planning on becoming a landscape architect and designing Zen inspired gardens and doing bonsai and stuff like
All
that.
right.
And yeah, then I was approached by the coaches of our first 15 rugby team at high school, and they basically said that if you put on a certain amount of weight, you'll captain the first 15, but if you don't put on the weight, you won't play, kind of thing.
Oh wow.
And so, as is my nature, I discovered everything I could about how to put on size and gain strength, and part of that obviously was nutrition, and really became fascinated with nutrition and how that can help improve performance initially.
Yep.
Several years later, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and so I began to become much more interested in the health side of nutrition as well. Having studied fitness training and nutrition at AUT, I then went back to college and studied naturopathy.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of tried to round out that sort of holistic side of what I do, and then from there, basically, I've been in clinical practice now for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, you and some of your listeners may know, I was sort of one of the first practitioners to start working in the low carb field in Australasia back in the late 90s.
Yeah.
Um, and since then, yeah, I've traversed through a number of different things. I've studied different mind body modalities, and my initial postgrad was actually in mind body healthcare, and then moved back into nutrition and really began to get heavily involved in the research in low carb. Basically, as soon as that started to be studied in any depth down this part of the world.
Yep. And your clients and clientele are mainly who are they now? They are obviously immune suffering clients as well with issues, obviously. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky now because I have, through the Holistic Performance Institute, my college, I've got a really strong network of other practitioners that I can refer on to.
Yeah.
And that allows me, plus my services are fairly demanded. So that sort of allows me to take on the clients that I really want to work with. And nowadays that is predominantly elite high performing athletes. Particularly, I
Interesting.
work with a number of, top level fighters. I've been a fighter myself in the past. And so I really love working in the fight nutrition game. Consult to a few very high profile athletes behind the scenes.
Hmm.
And also in terms of the clinical side, it's really now people with fairly serious disorders. So it's things that I've been afflicted with, the Crohn's disease, obviously. Mental health challenges is a really big thing for me because obviously I've also had my challenges with that as well, along with cancer and heart disease and other autoimmune conditions.
Yeah, there's definitely some research to show that high fat ketogenic diets are a good way to help impact those people with cancer. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually presenting on ketogenic diet for cancer at the Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine conference this year, and it's a really interesting topic because it's very promising.
Mm.
Obviously, any of us who have been looking into that ketogenic space for some time will understand how promising it is.
Mm.
But there are some fishhooks in there as well, and so it's very important for people to be aware of the nuances of the ketogenic diet for cancer and the ketogenic diet for certain types of cancer, because in some cases, particularly long-term use of a ketogenic diet may not be the best thing for all types of cancer. So, this is why it's important, I think, for people to get advice from experts. Get advice from people who are qualified, registered, and who have a very good working knowledge of the ketogenic diet if they're going to be doing, getting into ketosis.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is really, really exciting. And, science is always continuously evolving and developing. So, us too, for us PTs and coaches, it's important for us to upskill our knowledge as well. So, I've definitely taken a great, interest in ketogenic diet and applied it to myself. Which is really interesting, and obviously working with Melrose and meeting yourself, a few months back is how we all got started. So, that's just a little bit of context with the situation there, as to how we actually met. So, let's actually talk about. We've had so much talk about ketogenic and things like that, but what about the audience, to just give them some perspective of what it actually is? What if they don't know, have never heard of, they may have heard of this term before, but in your mind, in your opinion, if you could just simplify it for the general audience and public, how would you explain it? Or how would you define it?
Yeah, it's pretty simple, really. A ketogenic diet is basically any diet that elicits ketosis. And I know that sounds a little bit self-explanatory and a little bit oversimplified, but that's basically what it is, right? Any diet that encourages ketogenesis is a ketogenic diet. Any diet that encourages a state of nutritional ketosis is what we consider a ketogenic diet. So what that involves is a restriction of carbohydrate, and that's the key thing. People think a lot about the high-fat nature of a ketogenic diet, but in reality, any diet that is restricted enough in carbohydrate can result in ketosis. However, we need to get our fuel from somewhere, and so if you're on a very low carb diet, you need to be getting your fuel from something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to come from fats, right? And fats are going to be converted to ketones very effectively. Ketones are a great fuel that basically almost all tissue in the body can use, and specifically the brain and central nervous system can use those ketones very effectively.
Definitely for me.
And so
yep.
Yeah, and so typically your brain and your central nervous system would rely on glucose for fuel. When that's not available, you need something. It's a survival mechanism. Your body will produce ketones, and the brain can use them beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned it is quite difficult to sustain and be in a constant state of ketosis. So what are the actual, do you know the exact measurements and millimoles that you need to be in? What's the ideal range?
Yeah, I do. And it's interesting. I laugh because I've been battling a few peer reviewers at the moment because it's quite a controversial topic, mm-hmm. surprisingly, right? In the mainstream, you and I would read all the stuff online, and we've been associated with this for quite a long time. I've been doing this for 20 years, and we would all consider that this level of ketones in the blood over 0.5 millimoles per liter is what we consider nutritional ketosis. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of people in the medical community who would say that's not even close to being enough. You really need to be over 2 or 3 millimoles to be in what we would consider to be functional nutritional ketosis. The difference basically in the controversy is because, if you're a hammer, every problem appears to be a nail. If you're a doctor who has specialized in epilepsy in children who are non-responsive to drugs, mm-hmm. there's no doubt there's going to be better anti-seizure effects from a ketogenic diet that has or that elicits much higher levels of ketones, so plus 3 millimoles of beta-hydroxybutyrate per liter. But for most of us, that's not necessary, and it's not necessarily even appropriate, for most of us to be above 0.5 millimoles if we're feeling great and we're getting results is completely fine. There are some cases as well where people on a ketogenic diet won't even reach those levels. But my point of view is if functionally they're still feeling great, they're performing well, and they're getting the results they want, then it doesn't really matter so much as to what they're showing in the blood. What matters is how they're feeling and the results they're getting overall.
Exactly, because just any kind of shift or experience into a high-fat diet and reducing carbohydrates and things like blood glucose levels and reducing insulin, you're going to feel drastic effects right away, whether it be as soon as 2 weeks or 2 weeks or within a month. You should naturally feel like you've got a lot more improvement in energy, brain focus, and less brain fog as well. That's a really big thing, in particular for general population nowadays.
Yeah, and what we need to remember as well is that although there's a lot of research on ketogenic diets, stretching back really to the 1930s and earlier, so we're looking at near on 100 years of research now, we're still only scratching the surface with how that applies to normal everyday people or athletes or people just wanting to improve their performance and human potential, right? And one thing that hasn't necessarily been studied enough is the long-term fat or keto-adapted person. I don't know if I have told you this before, but I did a little self-experiment probably a year or two ago, and I quite often eat, a lot of carbohydrates at night. I sort of like the idea of carb backloading. It's not magical, but it just works for me, right?
Yeah, I do that as well. Yep, carb backloading.
Yeah, it's cool. It works really well for me, and one of the reasons is that it allows me to auto-regulate my calories. But I wanted to look at how that worked with respect to ketosis, because I've used ketogenic diets off and on for 20 years, but I'm not always on a strict ketogenic diet because I don't want to necessarily be that restrictive all the time.
It's very hard to maintain. For people who don't know, it's awfully very hard to maintain all the time. So and so I measured my beta hydroxybutyrate, my ketone levels, every morning, and then again before dinner, right? So after dinner, I'd be eating quite a lot of carbohydrates, so I knew I'd basically be kicking myself out of ketosis. Yep.
And what I found is consistently in the morning, I was around, maybe 0.2, 0.3 millimoles of beta hydroxybutyrate, but then by the afternoon, I was typically back up to about 0.7, 0.8 millimoles, right? Despite eating anything up to sort of 200 plus grams of carbohydrate per day, most of it in that compressed feeding window after dinner.
Sure.
Now, most people aren't necessarily going to be able to drift in and out of ketosis every day, but it's likely that, me being someone who trains, has a little bit of muscle, has done ketogenic diets off and on for a long time, and has generally been pretty low carb, high fat over such a long period of time, and is relatively insulin sensitive. It shows that there's metabolic flexibility. Now, one of my colleagues, apparently, he told me he passed this my data on to Steve Finney and Jeff Volek, and they basically said, nah, that doesn't happen. You can't really do that. But I've seen it enough myself, and I've seen it enough in clients, that we need to start considering that it's not just like an off-on switch, and it's not something that you have to necessarily be strict all the time.
Yeah.
There is a spectrum there, and there's a lot of variability. The key is to be flexible and to be metabolically efficient.
Fantastic. That's very something similar that we do at our gym here at Fifth Element Wellness in Clifton Hill. What we do is we have this approach actually with what we call a fresh start, or like a 30-day reset, and that's where we take away all kind of carbohydrates, even fruit temporarily. And we encourage more high-fat diets and things like that. And we also encourage a little bit more protein. So we just find that they don't actually have, enough amino acids in their body and things like that. So they get a good source of protein as well as fats and veg to just sustain that for about 30 days. And it's a big difference. They not only just drop inflammation, they actually get a lot leaner, but mentally and from a cognitive wise, they're feeling a lot better as well. So they're not really in a state of ketosis, but just simply by doing that, they've changed a lot, which is really great. Because we know that also, protein can actually convert into glucose as well, which can put you out of ketosis as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's something to consider. Where people need to be on a very strict ketogenic diet, particularly if they have the best example is epilepsy, or if they have a neural disorder of some sort where they want to actually have much higher levels of ketones, then we need to be quite aware of protein, and we don't want to have a protein intake that is too high at all. However, what I've observed and what we're beginning to show now in some of the research that we're doing behind the scenes is that for most people wanting to achieve that standard mainstream nutritional ketosis, even a relatively high protein intake typically doesn't keep them out of that.
Okay.
And cool. there are likely to be benefits from it, right? We know that higher protein, lower carb diets are effective for a range of things. They're very satiating. They leave your calories down. They help you to retain more muscle when you're dieting, all that kind of stuff. They improve cognition, So I think often, I actually just wrote an article on that for my Patreon blog about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and the baby in this case being protein.
Yeah.
Protein is so critical, and I think a lot of us that might debate the relative values of carbs versus fat, for example, would not be debating the relative role of protein.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what we do from there is actually we get carbs and we introduce them back in for clients, so long as their pinch measurements and things like that, their body composition is starting to adapt and change, and they're becoming more insulin sensitive, and then we can backload carbs, and we take that approach as well. So we use things like parsnips, pumpkin, things that are quite low in carbohydrate, doesn't really have a high content, maybe sweet potatoes as well, and maybe to depending on the person, maybe some like basmati rice or some jasmine rice, but just it all depends upon the person. So that's the approach we take, and that
sounds awesome. I mean, that's basically the approach that I laid out in both my two latest books, the Carb Appropriate Diet and the Keto Appropriate Diet books. It's basically that idea, right? Instead of restricting, say, instead of moderating calories or being overly concerned with calories and macros and things, it's a simple stepwise restriction or addition of food types. So, at the very extreme end, it's basically what you're doing in your kickstart, and then you begin to add a few things back and find out where your level of carb tolerance actually is.
Exactly. Yeah. So for the people to know what kind of fat sources are out there, what are the best fat sources now? We've been talking about, ketogenic diets and fats and things like that. But for the typical person, what does that look like? Because in their mind, they're thinking things like, butter and thinking all these kind of negative concepts that we've had ingrained in us over the last, probably 20 years or so, because we've just promoted that fats are bad and things like that, to stay away from them because they raise things like LDL, HDL, and things like that. So, what are the typical primary food sources that we should be wary of?
I think the key thing, especially if someone's wanting to go on a lower carb, higher fat diet, is to not actually stress about fat too much in either sense, either that they're bad, like we've been told, and they're obviously not, or that, the other extreme, a lot of people on ketogenic diets just load in so much fat. And the problem with that is it's just unnecessary. You find a lot of people are wanting to load in this fat because they want to be in this idea of ketosis, and they want that ketogenic level to be much higher. They want to be sort of exhibiting 2-3 millimoles, which is unnecessary, and they just want to ensure that they're basically staying in. The problem is that you overload with calories from any source, and it's going to inhibit your ability to lose body fat, right? It doesn't matter where it's coming from to some degree. This old idea that if you're in ketosis, you can't put on body fat or you can't not lose fat is bullshit.
Yeah.
And so typically when people lose their fear around fat, it's very easy to get good quality fats in, because if you're not taking the fat off meat, or you're not choosing those particularly lean sources, or taking the skin off chicken, you're already getting a lot of fat, natural, healthy fats occurring residually within food,
Protein especially. Yep.
Yeah, so you've got protein foods that contain great quality fats, like your meat, fish, eggs, even, the lower carb, full fat dairies and things like that. They have good quality fats in. So if you're doing that and you're adding just a little bit of, say, olive oil, macadamia oil, MCT oil, coconut oil, butter, ghee, whatever it is, to your cooking, or particularly with those vegetable oils like your olive, flax, and hemp seed oil. I'll obviously never cook with those. If you're adding those as dressings, then you don't necessarily have to lather on the fat. It's very easy to get enough fat to have proper ketogenic ratios, be in ketosis, still have appropriate amounts of calories, and basically get all those results. So it's actually a pretty easy process. The only thing that we would typically say to maybe avoid or reduce, and they're not bad absolutely, but to avoid or reduce those common seed oils, your sunflower, safflower, those types of things, because they are much higher in omega-6 fats. Now, contrary to popular belief, that's not actually that much of a problem. But what it means is that we're basically crowding out some of the other good quality fats. And we want to make sure we're having enough omega-3 fats. So, I'm a big fan of taking fish oil for that purpose, but also those other fats like flaxseed oil and hemp seed oil will have a little bit of that as well, albeit sometimes difficult to convert into the actual metabolites we need.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I probably nerded out a little bit.
No. I like it. I'm full on with that. I totally agree with you. I think general population, we have, a imbalance in ratios between omega-6 and omega-3. We consume too much grains and things like that, and we don't consume enough, oily fish and things like fish oil and cod liver oil and all these things which we can get. Sardines are quite high in vitamin A and high in vitamin D, and they're really a natural a superfood, really has a lot of benefits in that, which I don't think many people, consume enough of. So, yeah, I think I've read somewhere or heard somewhere that it's maybe 20-1, the ratio in terms of general population having more omega-6s than 3s, and, it should really be, what's the ratio, maybe 2-1 or something like that instead? I don't know.
Yeah, it should be, according to the ICCN, it should be under 7-1. And most of us would say, maybe 3-1 or less is the best ratio. Interestingly, though, and I've done a bit of research on this lately for my teaching, and it's probably, the ratio is probably only important in as much as, because we have so much omega-6 and so little omega-3, it's not so much the ratio, it's just that we ingest way too little omega-3.
Okay.
So that's why I say, if people are, not freaking out about the ratio, just avoid those common oils. That's easy. Eat a good diet that's based around fat-containing, healthy protein foods. Add some good quality oils to it. Make sure you're taking some fish oil. The key thing there is that you're boosting up your omega-3. That's the key, is that you're getting a critical mass of omega-3 that can support those inflammatory processes in the body.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely agree with that. When I first started, I was obviously, very heavy carb type, and since working as a PT and then coach, I've really switched it across, and I feel much more effective. I'm much more productive. And I require it because I work, 5:30 a.m. in the morning, first client, and some days I can finish up to 8 o'clock, 9 p.m. So they're long days, and I have minimal coffee. I don't rely on 2 double shots a day to get me through. Like, people don't believe me when I say I just have 1 or 2 a week, just purely for the taste of it, and that's about it. I don't rely on it as primarily caffeine as a fuel source to get me through, because of the fats I eat and the blood sugar level and stability that I have throughout the day. So they don't know until they try it themselves, really.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about any like kind of projects and upcoming events you have here. So this is your opportunity to throw some right hooks and get people knowing what you're up to. You mentioned it a little bit before, but talks, events, books, appearances.
Yeah, so this year we're really focused on finishing this research this first 6 months or so, and also just continuing to grow our presence through the Holistic Performance Institute. So I'm not sure if you know all that much about what we do at the Holistic Performance Institute, but we consider that we're probably the only graduate college in Australasia that really teaches metabolic adaptation to diet. And what I mean by that is typically when we're learning nutrition, we sort of learn the basic sciences and then we're suddenly thrown into dietary guidelines for health, which are typically based around really high carb, really low fat guidelines that don't work well for most people. And so what we do is change that up a little bit. We look at the basic nutrition sciences and then quickly move into how does the body actually change? How does cellular function, biochemical function, those types of things change in response to a change in diet?
Yeah.
In other words, what happens when we increase protein or reduce protein? What happens when we increase fat or reduce fat or carbohydrates? And so it's a slightly different way to look at it, but we've become very well known for that. And obviously through my position as being one of the first practitioners to start working in low carb in Australasia, we're sort of the premier place now for teaching low carb nutrition. So we offer a graduate cert in nutrition and a graduate diploma in nutrition based around those carb appropriate and low carb concepts. And so that's really my focus this year. I'm not doing as much speaking. I've typically done well over 50 keynote presentations a year, and that's just a little bit too much. And so I cut back a little bit.
That's a lot, yeah.
And just focusing on the teaching and the books that are either in process or out there at the moment. So the Carb Appropriate book and the Keto Appropriate Diet book.
Great. And where they can find that? Amazon, or you can find it online as well?
Yeah, Amazon. Yes. If you go to my Amazon page, my Cliff Harvey Amazon page, you'll find the Carbohydrate Appropriate Diet and the new release, the Keto Appropriate Diet. Keto Appropriate is just out in ebook at the moment as an early release, but that'll be out in hard copy in April.
Okay, fantastic. Good. And in terms of social media contacting or emails, if they want to address you directly or reach you directly, what would be the best platforms?
Best platform to connect with is I'm a Facebook guy, so find my Facebook page at Cliff Harvey Author. So it's just facebook.com/Cliff Harvey Author. Follow me there, and then feel free to message, engage. I love hearing from people, and I love just chatting about this stuff and getting great information out there.
Okay, fantastic. My internet just kind of dropped out a little bit, so I kind of just missed a little bit of the start. Do you mind renaming that? Just going over that name again?
For the social media?
The social media, yeah. It was Facebook.
Yeah, so the best place to get in touch with me is, or to follow what I'm doing, is on Facebook at facebook.com/Cliff Harvey Author. So that's my public page at Cliff Harvey Author on Facebook.
That's great. I didn't know you actually had one, so I'm gonna follow that. You
gotta follow it.
Yeah, because
a lot of, you know what it's like if people find out about what you're doing, they often request you as a friend. But the thing is, I don't post any nutrition stuff on my page anyway. It's all on my public page, my actual Facebook page, not my profile.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people miss out on all this, research that we're putting out and all the research that I direct people towards. So definitely follow that and get involved.
Awesome, will do. Yeah, I'll be sure to contribute and get involved in that as well. So, yeah, hopefully build some engagement, which would be good. How's everything else, training wise? Everything else wise? Any plans and goals, and what else? What else is to come this year in 2018? I know we're early in the year. Training. Let's talk about training first.
Yes.
What are you doing for training?
It's funny you asked that, because I got a little bit slack there for probably a year, 18 months, mainly just because I was so flat out with doing this research. And so this year I've really knuckled down. Actually, it was from the end of last year. So for the last maybe 4 or 5 months, I've really knuckled down and been trying to put some size back on. So I've put on about 10 kilos just through getting back into lifting properly again. And so that's really exciting. And I've just got strength goals, really. I want to get back into competition eventually. I used to compete in all-round weightlifting back in the day, and so I'd like to get back into masters competition now. And one goal I have is to lift the inch dumbbell again. I'm one of the few people who have lifted that at a low body weight, and I think I'm the only person who has lifted at a body weight of around 75 kilos. So it's basically a 75 kilo dumbbell with an extremely thick handle. So you're lifting your body weight with one hand on an extremely thick handle. And unfortunately, when I lifted that at a fitness expo here, there was no one around to take a video of it, so it's sort of undocumented. So
Oh, right.
I think I need to get back to doing some grip strength stuff again and lift that inch dumbbell so that I can show people that I actually did
Yeah,
it.
fantastic. That's good. Yeah, not good. So you're doing big lifts, compound movements, obviously. Any Olympic lifting you mentioned as well?
Yeah, I've actually just been getting back into my lifting through kettlebells for the last year. So just lifting the heavy bells, anything up to sort of 48 kilo kettlebells, just to set that sort of base again. And then I'll start adding in some barbell work probably
Awesome.
from next month. But there's a truckload of things you can do with a couple of heavy bells at home, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, great. That sounds really, really good. Cliff, thanks for your time, man. I really appreciate it. I'd love to catch up with you again next time you're here in Melbourne, and maybe introduce you to my gym. The not my gym, the gym I work at, the little boutique studio we have here in Clifton Hill. I think you'll really enjoy it. We've all got the same mentality and philosophies here, and big
Awesome.
on gut health and things like that as well. So it's really you'll see it's quite unique, and I think you'll enjoy the vibe. I think it's pretty cool.
Sounds great, mate. Yeah, we should catch up when I'm next over there and do a talk together and get back on the podcast again.
I don't know about a talk. I don't think I'm there yet, but um, yeah, I'll leave the talks and all that stuff for you. But I really appreciate you giving value and contributing to this health, and wellness and strength podcast. Really, so hopefully the audience and listeners have got some good information out of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucas. I've enjoyed it.
Good, good. Thanks.